Okay.
Okay, we're live, and I call this audio-video conference Board Team of 8 meeting for the Board of Trustees of Harlingen to order. Pursuant to the governor's cancellations of open meetings at this moment, this will be audio-video Team of 8 training. We do have a quorum, and we'll move straight into the Team of 8 training. I'll hand it over to Dr. Lindsay Wharton.
Good afternoon. It's always great to be with this board in Harlingen. Sorry that we can't be together, but always pleased to see you all in action and spend a few hours with you. We're looking forward to spending about 2 hours and 15 minutes engaged in some learning together, and then we'll provide you a little bit of homework to take with you as well. And the focus of our time is really on this work that the district has been doing to define great leadership and what that means in a moment like this, and what it could imply for like the ongoing work of facing and embracing change in the coming years. So before we dive in to our objectives and our agenda, I'm always eager to start by hearing a bit from you all, and wanted to just open with this thought that has really been inspiring us and challenging us, which comes from a gentleman named Ron Heifetz out of the Harvard Kennedy School, one of the defining thinkers on leadership in the face of change and what he calls adaptive leadership. And he describes adaptive leadership like this. He says, people who practice what we call adaptive leadership seize the opportunities of moments like the current one to hit the organization's reset button. They use the turbulence of the present to build on and bring closure to the past. In the process, they change key rules of the game, reshape parts of the organization, and redefine the work that people do. But the process of adaptation is at least as much a process of conservation as it is of reinvention. Targeted modifications in specific strands of the organizational DNA will make the critical difference. And I think the reason why I find this to be such a compelling anchor in a moment like this is districts across the state of Texas are being forced to navigate extraordinary change and extraordinary disruption. And it certainly presents opportunities to think about how you want to evolve and embrace change in the years ahead. But we know that a key part of that work is also about the things that have made the district great, the things that have made Harlingen great over many years that you want to retain and you want to preserve as you lean into the winds of change. And so what I would love to do is to hear from each of you about what this year has been like and what you're proud of, and but we probably don't have time to do that in our 2 hours. So would love for our introduction to just hear from each of you your thoughts in response to 2 questions. So as you introduce yourself, I would love for you to share a strength of Harlingen CISD that has always been true, that is a part of your tradition, that you're hoping to conserve and carry forward in the years ahead. And then second, one opportunity for change and innovation that you're seeing as you look ahead beyond 2020. So we're not in a circle, but I'll open it up to whoever would like to kick us off, and look forward to hearing from each of you.
As president of this board, I choose to go last.
I can go first. Bobby.
Bobby, go ahead.
Mr. President, these are great questions. Bobby Muniz here, introduction, right? I think we all met. We know each other very well. Excited about this opportunity to talk to you guys and learn from you. I love these meetings, unfortunately, and that's why I was asking that question earlier, Dr. Cavazos. If it was going to be in person, I was going to be there for sure for these guys, because these guys are amazing. Unfortunately, I guess you're in Austin, so we're Zooming. It's a totally different feel, of course, when we're Zooming, as we all know. But glad to participate in this and excited about it. Always fun learning from you guys. So one traditional strength or practice of HCISD that, communication is really great. You know, one of the strengths that we have as a board, as a district, is communication. It only keeps getting better and better. I hope we continue to conserve that, and I think during this time, right, it's even more important to be able to not only communicate with at the higher level of what we're doing as a district, but I think it's important to even go down deeper, right? And we talked about this, and we've mentioned this somewhat in the beginning of COVID. We really need to be communicating with our teachers, right? We really need to be asking, hey, how are you doing? I know that we've done that in the past, but I think at this point in time, we need to not only conserve it, but even go deeper and be asking those critical questions, because I feel like, and I don't feel like, I know our teachers are being overworked. And we really need to talk about mental health with them, not only with them, with everybody across the board. That's important to me, and I think it should be important to all of us. What is one opportunity for change and innovation that you're seeing through 2020? You know, the fact that we are seeing so many opportunities, I think, yeah, hybrid is tough, but we're learning that we can do it, right? And you're seeing a lot of the teachers and administrators that they actually they're being very successful at it. They're being innovative with the way they teach, the way they're presenting information. I know that's probably less than the majority, but there's a way that if there's a way we can tap into that. And, you know, one of the things I love is success leaves clues, right? If we can go to those teachers and to those administrators and say, hey, what are you guys doing that's so amazing? How can we duplicate this and now extrapolate it across the whole organization? That is huge opportunity, and that's, you know, through innovation, what type of innovative skills are they using to do that? I think that's a huge opportunity. And I'll end with that.
Thanks so much.
Mr. President, I guess I can go next, or?
Go ahead, Javier.
Thank you. I agree with everything that Bobby said, and thank you all for having this. I look forward to it as well. It's exciting. I again wish we could have been in person. I think it makes it a little bit more personal. But you know, I think we're getting used to Zoom, and I think we're getting comfortable with it, and I think it's becoming the new norm. Whether it's going to stay the norm, who knows? But I guess one of the strengths, and I was saying, I wrote down exactly the same thing that Bobby said, which was communication. But I guess it's communication and camaraderie. You know, that's really we just don't communicate, but we really work together to make sure that we have a common goal and a common solution. And so I think the strength that HCISD has during this pre-COVID, and actually even before the pre-COVID, was, you know, always looking at opportunities and not looking at past practices. We look at what's out there, what needs to move forward, how we need to move forward, and not being scared of doing something that we're not comfortable doing or something that we are not used to doing. And I think that's a big strength, and that's a big compliment to our superintendent and his administrative team, that they do what they have to do to move forward. Don't try to fit something that's not working anymore. So I think that's a huge positive for our district. I think one of the opportunities for change and innovation that we're seeing through 2020, I think the opportunity is not settling and not looking at what we've done, but reinventing ourselves, staying relevant with what things are going on, and making sure that we've got to change on a dime. Every day is different. Every situation is occurring, and what we solved yesterday, there's 10 more issues that are occurring, and you know, it's not going to be something that we have the answer. And we're not going to have a playbook. But the change and the innovativeness of what we need to do is continue to be one step ahead of everything that is happening. And I think if we do that, we're going to stay relevant, and we're going to have to be relevant in what we do. And I think we're seeing it now. And I think Bobby said it earlier when he said that, the teachers are being asked to do many things, and it's not just the teachers, it's the administrators. It's a domino effect for everyone. We're building a plane in the air. So it's something that we need to continue to work on. But if there's anybody that can take on that challenge, there's nobody better than HCISD.
Thank you, Javier.
Mr. President, I can go next if that's okay.
Okay, Dr. Reiniger?
So, Belinda Reininger, great to see you guys again. I think that a traditional strength or kind of strength and practice that we have in place is a real commitment to quality improvement. So there's an ongoing dedication, but even more than dedication, action toward improvement, right? There's processes that get put in place so that when we identify something we want to work on, we work on it, we solve it, we implement it, and we keep going, right? And I think that's a downfall for a lot of organizations, but not for HCISD. And then in terms of innovation and change, I think there's a lot of lofty things that we can do in terms of incorporating, some new curricular topics because of what the world is throwing at us. So a little bit more, that's a little bit more responsive to what kids are going to need coming forward. But I think more importantly, or maybe even bigger than that, is that I think we have an opportunity to continue our quest for looking at how we educate those children who may have special needs, may have special learning abilities, may have special social, economic circumstances where and this is, they're not going to fit into our normal processes well, but they are our kids. And Keys Academy is an example of that, right? These are our kids, and we have the opportunity to modify how we reach them. And I think we can really innovate and do it with incredible integrity. And so I think that's an innovation.
Thank you, Dr. Reiniger.
Mr. President,
Yes, sir. Go ahead, Mr. Powers.
I think it's, to me, one of the traditional strengths that I've seen in HCISD through the years is I think we've been very fortunate, and I think it's probably due to the board, but we've always had strong leadership in our administration. I think we've had a series of very successful and driven superintendents. I think the staff that we have, Art, don't get too big ahead here, but anyway, I think that the staff that we've, through the years I've been on the board, I don't think you could pick better people to run each of the different departments. They're very talented. They're all leaders. They're all motivated to, make their departments the best that they can be, and they've done so with bringing new ideas and trying new, being very innovative. As far as practices, one thing that I've always noticed, even before I was on the board, I've always felt that HCISD involved the community in its endeavors, always bringing them, just like we did on the bond issue. But even before that, I think the district has always tried to get the community active and to support, which they do heavily, our district and all the projects that we put on. So those are the two things that I can think of.
Thank you, Greg.
Who we lacking?
Jerry and Dr. Perez.
Jerry and Dr. Perez. I don't know where Jerry is.
You want me to weigh in here, or?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, can you, Dr. Perez? Yep.
Yeah, sure. So sorry, I had an emergency phone call I had to attend to, but I apologize. I didn't hear the other responses, but I guess I'll answer these two questions that Lindsay's posed. So I feel for me, the district has always been in a place of, kind of like Greg was saying, we've always had a strong sense of trust in the community. And in my mind, I feel that's probably the most important thing to conserve going forward is, you can only move at the speed of trust. And so I feel strongly that as long as we continue to lead in a way that basically is transparent and that is bold and innovative, but is also bringing folks along with us for the ride, so to speak, right? And involving the community, as long as we can preserve that trust with the community and with all our stakeholders and with our, legislative leaders and folks in the commission and folks in the governor's office. This district is pretty unique in that we work with a lot of different stakeholders that a lot of school districts don't, because we have those direct connections and ties. And I think as long as we continue to do that, I feel that we can, do some pretty incredible things, continue to do incredible things going forward. As far as a new opportunity or, and change or innovation or things, we can do differently. I mean, I think that's on everybody's mind, obviously, but, I just feel, I think we all know that, remote learning, remote working, all those things are going to continue to be a huge, huge presence in the future. And so I just feel that this district should continue to lead in terms of, not only reimagining face-to-face learning and figuring out what's best done face-to-face, but also reimagining remote learning and figuring out what's best or what could be scaled there as well, and finding that blend while also aligning with higher ed in the process. And so I feel that we should be using new innovative ways of face-to-face instruction and new innovative ways of remote instruction that embeds the whole, soft skills all along the way, but at the same time, actually further aligns itself with higher ed. So I feel that we've got to figure, and throw in there also the workforce, and so I feel that we've got to figure out a way, to get kids to and through. And the only way we're going to do that is if we're teaching the right stuff the way they need to learn it, and of course aligning ourselves with workforce and with higher ed, and then letting folks come in and out as they wish. Because I don't think that our traditional school year calendar is going to persist for much longer. So we need to be on the leading edge of that, creating our own calendars and not waiting for folks to tell us how to do and what to do, that kind of stuff. So that's my answer.
Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Perez. Ms. Ferry?
Yes, sir. Golly, it is wonderful to hear all of your thoughts. I just love working with such an erudite group of thinkers. It's wonderful. As far as the students, we could all have many answers in each of these two excellent questions. The strength that comes to my mind immediately, and several of you, of course, have alluded to it because it is very obvious, but it's key to us, and that is the inclusive partnerships that we have locally, regionally, state level. Nolan was addressing. We have built these partnerships with great care over a number of years, and they have been ever expanding. And I do believe that they have allowed us to build the trust upon which we have built an almost entirely new school district. And so that has been critical, and I think that we have to have that front and center in everything we do, because I agree with my colleagues that we are getting ready to move in ever larger and ever different kinds of ways. And to do that, we need our whole team of partnerships to join along with us. So that's been a great strength for us, a great strength for us. But it also tends to include the response that came to my mind immediately for your question about opportunities, because we really are creating and moving this increasingly giant ship through ever increasingly troubled or tumultuous or roiling waters, so to speak. I look at the district that way, and so I think that it's going to be really important that we exercise great care, as we redefine what we're doing to reinforce what our key values are, and in amongst all of the people values that we have. I think we always, of course, you'll notice I'm an old school teacher. Now, it's always important that we remember what we are really also about is teaching academic excellence. All of us in this meeting tonight are the beneficiaries of having been taught academic excellence, both being taught that in the classroom and how to learn to pursue it on our own afterwards. And I think that that's a real challenge as we continue to innovate with these multiple types of campus, these specific task campuses, which are working just so extraordinarily well. But we can't lose sight as we move this ship through these waters, and by creating, ever increasing outreaches to different kinds of specific subject areas, that what we really are all about is academic excellence. And then we shore that up with everything else, but that has to remain a priority. And I think a lot of districts forget that along the way, and or it gets bumped to the side. So that would be my two top thoughts on my brain.
Thank you, Jerry. And Lindsay and Colin, I don't know if everybody else is on. I chose to go last because I took everybody's notes and I could just repeat what they said. I'm kidding.
Smart strategy, that's good.
I'm kidding. But, as they were talking, and if you noticed as they spoke, a lot of it was, similar things, which, says a lot about our district, that, everybody feels the same way. At least we all do here. But as they were speaking, I thought of a meme that I saw a few days ago, and I went back on my phone, and I'm glad I saved it, because it kind of speaks to what we're talking about here, at least these questions. That meme says, plot twist. 2020 has actually been the best year of your life. You've faced challenge after challenge, you've adapted, and you've overcome. 2020 has forced you to grow exponentially. Don't take that for granted. It's kind of how I feel about our district. And to answer that first question, and a couple of other colleagues alluded to it, I think we're seen as a leader in this community. And by community, I mean the Valley in South Texas, Harlingen. It goes to what Greg said about having strong leadership at the administration level. It goes to what Dr. Perez and Ms. Fleury say about having the trust of the community and building those partnerships, the camaraderie, the communication, everything that has been mentioned allows us to be that leader as a district in the community. I think whether they admit it or not, some do, I think other districts look to us to see what we're going to do. What is Harlingen going to do? Especially during these past 9 to 10 months. And then they either follow suit or do something off of that. But, and that starts at the top with Dr. Cavazos and the way he's led us and his staff, his senior team has led us through this. an opportunity for change and innovation, I mean, you know, we've always been bold. You know, the school district's always been bold. Our superintendent has always been bold, and he has senior team members that are just as bold as him, that follow the lead to take this district to another level. I think an opportunity is here, going off what the meme says, is that I don't think we're afraid to be even more bold. You know, I mean, we've been kind of forced to do certain things like, you know, hybrid learning or remote learning, remote teaching, and while it may have created some, you know, headaches back in March, and even now, somebody, I think it was Dr. Muniz, said, you know, teachers are doing more work, but we're not going to be afraid to be even more bold moving forward past this year. And I think to me, I see that as an opportunity for change and for further innovation. I don't have a specific example of innovation, but I think there's an opportunity to be even more bold, because we're not going to be afraid to kind of push that envelope.
Great.
Mr. President, can I just say one additional thing?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
And I think all the board would agree with this. Lindsay, I think one thing you need to know about this district is, and I don't know when it came, maybe Ms. Fleury, our board historian, may know, but it seems like the last several years, this is just on the first question, what to conserve, but it just seems that this district has a relentless dissatisfaction about it for whatever reason. Even though onlookers around the valley and other places would say, gosh, you guys have a pretty good district, but it just seems like we're always a little bit ticked off about the way things are, and we want to make them better. And I think I would want to conserve that. So I just wanted to throw that in there. And I think, I don't know where I got that relentless dissatisfaction term from. Maybe it was you, Art. I have no idea. But it comes to mind, and I think that it's sort of been around for several years. And I think we ought to make sure that we stick with that attitude of just being dissatisfied with where we are.
It was actually during one of my evaluations, Nolan, but go ahead, let's move on. That happened in
I
existence.
apologize for making that public.
Right, it's a little late.
Yeah.
Okay, move on.
Yeah. Now, may I respond real quickly to that, please, Lindsay?
Yes.
I think
You may.
Yeah. Actually, Nolan, that is a profound observation. And Art probably knows where I'm going with this, but my dissatisfaction for decades has, in a beloved environment, but dissatisfaction has been precisely what you just identified not happening. I always felt like the standard in public education, Nolan, for many years, the standard term was gradual improvement. And it used to drive me up the proverbial wall as a parent and then as an early board member, because it is exactly what was happening. You know, what we talked about is exactly what was happening. It was very gradual, if at all. And it was extremely difficult to work within that environment because there were no expectations, no matter how grand the expectation was, that was not based upon gradual improvement. And it was like having to live in a train that was just kept trying to get going and kept trying to get going and couldn't quite get there. And so then, of course, out came the book Good to Great and identified, wow, this is happening everywhere in all realms. You know, we're just sticking with good and not moving to great. And I will say that I'll be honest with you right now, in response to your point, I believe that it was the moment in time when we had not yet quite the board we have now, which I do believe is the strongest board we've ever had. In fact, I know it is. But it was when you and Caesar and, came on the board and began to stir things up a little bit. And then more board members came on, and it became its own faster and faster rolling train. And the turning point to me was when we initiated the Transforming Teaching and Learning Committee, which propelled all sorts of outside thinking because it gave us the opportunity to do this. It was not that that had not been proposed many years before, may I say. Some of us had been trying to get the extra meeting for years, and the board members were an impediment to that, as were some of the staff members. And so all of that began to come together, and I give you a great deal of credit for that, Dr. Pettis, I really do. Now, I do believe that it would have and could have stopped midstream if we did not have the new board members come on who are with us now. But the initial time of that really did come not so very long ago when we moved away from gradual improvement in the Harlingen School District to exponential improvement based on strategic planning. So that's my response.
Thank you very much. Dr. Cavazos, do you want to contribute here before we roll into our
Yeah.
objectives and where we're headed from here?
Yeah, and real quickly, I just, everybody made some incredible points, but I think that one thing we want to conserve is the trust, because we're able to navigate the good, the bad, and the indifferent as long as there's trust in the community. And the only way to accomplish that is to engage the community and to engage partnerships and so forth. And I think you can connect all those dots. I think that one opportunity for change and innovation stands in this whole thing that has been illuminated, that not one size fits all, and that the system can adapt to begin to meet the different needs of the different students and their needs. And so I think that that's a great opportunity, because we saw what is possible when we're thrown into something, but that there's a lot of trust to move us in that direction. So I think there's a great opportunity for change and innovation just in that space of getting away from one size fits all, but that in fact we can individualize for students and groups of students that need it. And so I think that's the opportunity moving forward.
Well, I really appreciate everything that you all have shared and benefited from this discussion, including, a bit more insight into the history of the district, because I think, we're going to be talking a lot about how do we embrace the change that is to come, and how can our expectations of leaders, as articulated in the leadership definition, provide a mechanism for preparing for the future. But I think, to be clear, change and preparation for the future is always rooted in the things that we're proud of, and it's clear that there's a really strong foundation and a readiness to embrace what's coming next. So looking forward to digging into that a little bit more, and we'll probably come back to some of the things that you all have shared. So our objectives for our remaining time is to first talk in a little bit more detail about this leadership definition, which you all have seen, and how it can serve both for a foundation for organizational growth and development now in this extraordinary time that we find ourselves in, but also in the years to come. Implicit in a lot of your answers were leadership attributes, leadership skills, and people. Like most of these things aren't actually systems that live on their own. And so the question is, how do you continue to build the capabilities to sustain these things that the district has established as strengths and to grow? Then we'll go a little bit deeper into some of the detailed behaviors behind this definition, just spend some time becoming familiar with it. I think based on what you've shared, you're going to find a lot of resonance between both the strengths that you've identified and the opportunities in those behaviors. And then at the end, we're going to have a bit of a discussion about the ways in which, this new way of thinking about leadership may present new opportunities for us to think a little bit differently about how we've done the work of talent development or leadership development. So we're going to explore this idea of a mental model, name what that is, and think about the way in which we might have to revisit some of our mental models as we do the work of developing people. Now, to be clear, there will be some scenarios that I throw out, the goal, but there's not an objective of our time in the next 2 hours for me or for Holdsworth to explicitly recommend any particular talent development strategies that Harlingen would take on. This is bigger picture, conceptual, designed to explore our imagination a little bit, and to start creating the space for the types of change that may be coming in the years ahead.
So basically, we're teaching you, is that what's going on here?
Sure, that's one way to think about it. But I think another way to think about it is, I'm going to provide the frame And each district has to paint the painting. Because one of the things we're going to talk about immediately is how context influences the actions that we take, and you all own the context. So we'll frame this up, and then, yeah, you can do the work. Sounds good. All right, so how we'll spend our time, we've finished the warm-up. We're going to spend a bulk of it on leadership definition and culture change. Then we'll intro mental models, talk about implications for talent management, and we'll close. So the way we're going to move through this time is I'm going to introduce kind of some short, like, teaching vignettes, where I introduce some concepts that then I invite this group to engage with. So this first section is kind of themed about how does this leadership definition relate to the idea of change, which we started talking about at the beginning, and in particular in a period like this one, where we're facing so much disruption. Jerry, I thought your analogy of moving the ship through increasingly troubled waters was very apt. And so I wanted to kind of start there in our thinking, and this may be review for a few of you who have been following our work over the last few weeks. So I want to take us back a few years ago. This is a picture of the organizing board of Holdsworth when we were visiting the Army War College in Pennsylvania. And we went there to study the way that this enormous, talk about a big ship moving through choppy waters, this enormous American institution has approached the work of developing leadership over decades. And the way we got access to this place was through the gentleman who circled, whose name is General George Casey. He was a 4-star general, led the troops in Iraq for several years, and then served as the chief of staff for the Army. He's a member of our organizing board, and he helped to facilitate our learning as an organization about the way this work developed in this very different institution. And one of the things that we learned about when we were at the Army War College in 2014 or 2015 was this concept of VUCA. Anybody heard of this, familiar with this? Jerry, I know that you have heard about this in the last few weeks. So VUCA, for those of you who this is ringing a bell, but it's not super concrete, is a term that is an acronym that stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguous. So it describes the state of the world. Do any of these conditions sound relevant to what you've been navigating over the last 6 or 7 months? My guess is they do.
All.
Check. And the reason I'm introducing, this is an academic concept, we're going to talk about it a little bit, but yeah, this is a catchy word, it describes our reality. But what's really important about this concept and the story that I want to tell to kick off our discussion is naming this context was important in the Army because they realized that they needed different leaders to succeed in a context that was volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. Or they needed leaders with different skills, I don't want to make Dr. Cavazos too nervous, than the leadership demands of a world that was more stable, more certain, more predictable, more simple, more clear. And that the demands on leadership looked really different. And if the demands were changing, they needed to think about what were the new leadership requirements, and then how do we develop people to be able to meet those requirements in order to succeed. So if we think about how do we build on the tradition, the pride, the success that's already here in the organization, but then what are the skills that people will need to also move the organization forward, to innovate, to change, that's kind of what this articulation of leadership is designed to do. So a little bit more history before we turn it over for discussion. So this term, VUCA, did not actually become very prominent in the military until post 9/11. So in a post 9/11 context, the nature of engagement with the enemy changed pretty significantly. And this term started really claiming resonance. And for those of you who follow military history, if you think about some of the new methods that were being used in the subsequent 10 to 20 years, it was all based on volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And how do you respond to that kind of environment? But the interesting kind of fact is that this term was actually coined in 1989, and it was the Army's prediction of what the world would be like after the fall of the Soviet Union. And that prediction, what it was intended to do was to say, we need to start preparing leaders differently to be ready to succeed in this environment. But there wasn't a lot of traction around this idea when the experts sort of started to agitate around this. And I just want to, pose some rhetorical questions, which is, what if the military had started retooling its leadership in the late 1980s? How much better prepared could it have been to meet the conditions that it would face in the early 2000s? And that causes me to notice the fact that it often takes a major public crisis to get us to internalize the need to change. There are a lot of challenges that schools and districts are facing that have been with us for a really long time. When we talk about how do we build a system that truly meets the needs of every learner, that's not a new reality in 2020. But the circumstances that we're in have increased the urgency around our need to respond to that. And so I would argue, and Eladio, it reminds me of the meme that you shared, that in addition to all the challenges that 2020 presents, it also is an invitation to us to not just survive those challenges, but to actually start making the kinds of shifts that will make us much stronger leaders, but also a much stronger organization for the decades that are going to come ahead of us. And so briefly, and then I'm going to turn it over to you all to do the work. The simple version of what does VUCA mean for leadership? There are a lot of things that we prize in leaders, and I've thrown up my list of things that I think we prize in leaders and in ourselves. People who are confident and kind of can predict the future, are visionary, knows what's coming next, and those conditions are pretty easy to meet in a world that's simple and stable. But when we put those expectations through a VUCA world, leadership becomes much more challenging. And I think this is a really ripe time to have this discussion about what does leadership look like in Harlingen, because it's an opportunity to say, in light of these challenges that we face, what are leaders going to need to, what skills are leaders going to need to have, and how can we make sure that we're prepared to meet those challenges? So that brings us to what Harlingen has articulated as its vision for leadership. And I believe you all have seen this. You have a version in your email. I would be curious, we're going to go a little bit deeper on this. What do you notice about these competencies that are outlined around the edges of the circle? And in what ways do these competencies relate to this idea of leading in an increasingly volatile world, steering a ship in increasingly troubled waters? What stands out to you all as you look at this document?
Lindsay, real quick, are you going to go back to that slide eventually, the three choices?
So we can talk about those. I skipped over it in the service of time, but I think
I'm sorry about that.
No problem.
I was reading it, I was like, I want to know.
Yeah. So I think that there's three choices if you don't kind of reframe leadership expectations. One is you set individuals up to feel a constant sense of failure, because they're trying to do all these things on the left in a world that doesn't allow them to operate in those ways. So if you tell people your job is to have all the answers, but you live in a world like the one that we live in right now, that's not actually, in the world we live in now, your job is to ask the right questions. Your job is to revisit and revise and pivot and communicate. So I think that's one option. The second thing that happens if you don't change these expectations is people try to gravitate back towards the past. The world in the past where they felt comfortable, the world in the past where they felt successful. And that's what diminishes the organization's capacity to change. And we miss the opportunity to improve. Or the third, this is one of those leading questions where the last thing in the multiple choice is the right answer, is you can reframe kind of the expectations of what it looks like to lead in this world, and you can provide people with support to meet it. Yeah. And I think, and the good news is, Harlingen was already kind of doing this work, and I think has an opportunity to utilize this tool to name for leaders, one, here's some things that have always been true of what it means to be a great leader in Harlingen CISD. But two, here are a couple of areas where we're really being challenged and stretched. in this world, and we're going to support you to live in to these attributes, to these competencies. So I would be curious, as you look at this, if there are one or two competencies that seem like especially important to Harlingen and its success this year and in the years to come.
Mr. President, I don't even know, I mean, it almost seems like if Art and his folks cheated and basically helped us answer Lindsay's question by putting this together. I'll let y'all weigh in if y'all think 2 or 3 are more important. I'm sure I can take a stab at it, but I would go in each one of these and say that each one of these things, these skill sets or trait, what did you call them, Lindsay? Competencies, thank you, competencies. I could make the argument that each one of these is the most important thing, to have leading in a VUCA world, whether it's results-driven, innovative, collaboration. I mean, I would think you can make the case for each one of these things. And so I would be curious to see what my colleagues think, but, I'd have to think a little bit longer as to which 2 are the most important, but I would go as far as to say that all of these things are very, very important, and actually are a key to successfully leading in this type of a world.
Yeah, this is, Mr. President, this is Belinda. I was thinking, well, that's it. We got them all. And so then I was trying to think, well, what's not there? And I really couldn't think of anything that wasn't there either, right? I feel like, I don't know, somebody cheated and knew the answer and put it all around the circle or something. But I do think for me, strategic thinking just kept jumping out at me as something, that I was like, yeah, I'm behind that one for sure. But honestly, they were all there. And the reason for strategic thinking, I just think there is so much noise. There is so much information. There is so many choices, not all good, not all bad, but it's just a flood of information that we have to be really strategic about what we do. Anyway.
I guess I'll take a stab at, and I'll be, if you have to pick 2, I think I would start with building the trust, relationships, and the collaborations. And let me explain why. Because the strategic thinking is great, innovative, everything, but if we don't have the buy-in of the team, if we don't have the communication, if we don't have the trust before we do anything, all the other ones are going to fall short a little bit. So I think every single one of them is important, like everybody's been saying. I don't think you can have one without the other. But again, just a snapshot of me looking at it, the building of the trust, and maybe even the effective communicator, collaboration, and the building trust. I think those 2 and then everything else is the framing and everything else that goes on with it. So if I had to pick, that'd be my rationale on picking 2.
May I chime in?
Yes, sir, Dr. Muniz.
Mr. President, thank you. No, I love this. There's synergy with it. There's a reason why it's a circle. They all balance each other. Now, if I were to say there's something missing, there is something missing. But it's missing on purpose, and it's accountability, and that belongs right in the middle, because when you have all these things working together, we have accountability. So, it's all, every single one of these pieces is important. It all revolves around accountability. Without the action, we can think all day, but without the action, we don't get anywhere. I really love this model, by the way, and it's one of the things I talked to Dr. Cortana about, and I think Dr. Nuyola also, this needs a name. Because I have talked to teachers about this and kind of quizzed them on it, and they say that leadership definition thing. Is there a reason why it hasn't been named Compass yet?
Well, the name is actually Experience Leadership in HCISD.
They don't remember that.
Yeah.
It doesn't work. Anyways, I don't want to go backwards. But great model.
Well, and to build on, and if other folks want to jump in, but it was funny as I listened to what y'all listed when we opened. You know, Bobby, you talked about communication, and you also talked about the importance of caring for people, which is really called out in that Heart for People section. You know, trust came up a lot, innovation, strategic thinking. You all named, you know, a lot of what is here, which suggests that Dr. Cavazos and his team and you all are pretty aligned around your vision and expectations for leadership.
Lindsay, if I could, just one, you know, as I was listening to my colleagues, you know, I think if, in my opinion, if we were to pick two things, I would probably pick one from each side. And the one thing from each side kind of basically it requires the other three from that side. And I would say, you know, the building trusting relationships, I mean, to do that, you have to collaborate, be an effective communicator, develop yourself and others, right? So I think that's the one key thing from that side, the Heart for People. And on the other side, it's results driven, right? To get results, I mean, you got to continuously fail and then figure out, okay, how do we make this work? And to do that, to get beyond failure, to get to success, you have to be innovative, strategic thinking, be adaptable. So in my mind, the building trusting relationships and the results driven are the sort of the two big ones from each side, you know, that because they actually require the other things as well, you know, so anyway.
Great. So in addition to this ring of the circle, behind each of these, there's also a set of behaviors. Because it's one of the things that we've learned is when we say effective communicator, it's really easy for all of us to say, yeah, that's really important. But we've all got slightly different ideas in our minds of what that means and what it looks like. And so it can be difficult for an individual to identify, you know, where they need to grow and for that support to be provided without a little bit more detail underneath that kind of high level concept. And so that's what those behaviors are intended to do. So I'm going to highlight just a couple of these, and then we'll do a little bit of self-reflection and work on our own. So we'll start just by digging into innovative. I did a terrible job of predicting what y'all might say would be the most important because you talked about all of them. But we'll dig into innovative. And so you can see here and then in the document that you have, you know, that behind innovative, there's 4 different behaviors that a leader would demonstrate to fulfill this competency. And so I'll give you a chance just to read through all these. This slide will stay up there. And then we'll just invite 3 or 4 board members to share an observation of where you've seen these behaviors in action in Harlingen in the last 3 months since school started.
And Lindsay, on a side note, are you gonna send us this PowerPoint so that to each and every single one of us, or to Art, and he can disseminate it to us?
I definitely can, yeah.
I appreciate that.
So what do you think? Where have you seen staying current of best practices, implements new ideas, empowers innovation, or leading change in action in Harlingen in the last 3 months?
Well, if I might speak, Lindsay, I would speak not so much to the past, because we could say a lot about that. But I think what we just experienced a few minutes ago with Veronica's explanation of what we're moving into, and the reason that I have such confidence about it, having been through several multiple unsuccessful attempts on this pay range salary issue, is because I think it does all of this. I was looking at it from the perspective of Veronica's presentation and how this school district is stating right now publicly that we are going to work through that issue. And it looks to me like it incorporates every one of these, and that gives me great confidence that we will come out on the very successful side of that issue.
Yeah. I got to hear that presentation as well, and it definitely, I heard a lot of discussion about responsibly implementing new initiatives and ideas as a part of how that would be implemented. Maybe one other person.
I don't mind chiming in,
Great.
Mr. President.
Go ahead, Bob.
So over the last 3 months, I mean, staying current with best practices, being involved with healthcare and knowing what's going on with COVID. In fact, I mean, getting this new grant and this testing is very innovative. Implementing new ideas, making sure that we have the proper equipment for not only our students, but our teachers, being at the cutting edge with that. And of course, empowering innovation with technology, looking for new ways, new systems to be able to help our students. And of course, leading from the front, being proactive versus reactive. We see a lot of school districts around us being very, very reactive to the changes going on, and we are studying all kinds of models to make sure that we lead and make the right decisions.
Great. All right, so we're going to move in. The reason why this is important is because in the absence of a clearly articulated view of what great leadership is, we're each pursuing like our own vision for that. And I would imagine that every single person in Harlingen CISD is working hard to be the best leader they can in the role that they're in. But we might each have slightly different ideas about what that looks like. And so this definition gives us a common starting point for naming what those expectations are. And when we reflect on that articulation, those competencies, the expectation is not that every one of us is going to be exceptional in every area of that definition. The idea is that we're each going to have some established strengths and some growth opportunities, but naming those gives us an opportunity to start having some coaching opportunities, some development opportunities to say, how can I get better at some of the areas here where I'm not as strong? And so the ability, and also how can I lean on my team members who may have some different strengths from me? So to practice this, to give us a chance to get into this document and explore these behaviors a little bit more, and to practice using this as a tool for self-reflection, we're going to ask each of you to open up that document that you got in your email. And I'm going to give you about 7 minutes. So I'm going to drop the time a little bit. I'll put a timer up. Just to read through that and to identify 2 behaviors that you would say, I'm really good at that. As a board member or in my day job, this is like a real strength that I've established in my life and my career. And then maybe 2 areas where you're like, that's something that I'm still learning, that's something that I'm still working on. So when we say behaviors, remember that you've got these competencies along the top. So that's like build trusting relationships, collaborates. And then you're going to see the behaviors down below. And so really dig into those behaviors to identify 2 strengths and then 2 growth opportunities. So I'll put a timer up. I've got, it's about 5:24. So we'll come back together around 5:32 and share out.
Can we,
So
re-
just
can
be
can
clear, these are
someone resend
strengths
that? Can someone
on-
resend that to their email?
Yes, I believe Dr. Corton can resend that if you don't already have it.
Lindsay, just to be clear, you want 2 strengths and 2 weaknesses regarding the district?
For you personally.
Personal, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right.
Veronica, do you have that document that you can email, or Lindsay, can we share that document, or is it too big?
I think it's too big for me to put up on the screen.
Okay,
Hey,
so,
Doc, Corton sent it earlier, it's the Excel file.
yeah,
Yes,
and,
sir, and I'll resend, just in
okay.
case that would.
So it'll be on the top of their email list. And when they share the 2 things that they're good at, the other board members will let them know if that's true or not, right? Is that how it's gonna work? or-
That's exactly right. And you'll go first.
Oh, no, don't.
We have a buzzer, we can,
We have buzzard. Wrong.
I just resent the file.
Okay. Yes, sir. You, that's fine. Don't worry about it. Yeah, no, don't, let me, I'm gonna take a picture of it and I'll text it to you. Okay.
I was the only one who got the sirens that went off at the end. But that was about 7 minutes. Hopefully that gave you enough time to read through most of those behaviors. And what I'd like to do, let's actually just focus for now on sharing some of the strengths that we identified. So we know sometimes people can feel a little more bashful about talking about growth opportunities. We think at Holsworth you shouldn't, because everybody has them. And the key is just knowing what they are and working on them. But in the spirit of time, in service of time, we'll just focus on strengths. So what I'd be curious for people to do is just to share the 2 behaviors that you identified, and then I'm going to plot those, like not with your name or anything, but just with a little dot around the circle, so we can kind of get a snapshot of how the strengths of this group break down. We'll have a quick discussion about that, and then we'll move in to another discussion. So whoever would like to kick us off, I'll turn it over to you.
I'll start it off, Lindsay. For strengths, and you said these were personal, right? Yeah. I put down leverages partnerships under collaborates and transparency under effective communicator.
Thanks.
I'll go next. Empathetic and, I can't read my handwriting. I'm dependable and continuous learner.
You're muted, Lindsay.
Is empathetic and dependable under builds trusting relationship? I don't have my behavior sheet up.
Let me look at this huge document. I'm just playing. It's under builds trusting relationships.
Okay, and then your second?
And, let's see. Where is it?
Which
I
one was your
circled that
second
too,
one,
but-
Bobby?
What's that?
What was
I
your second?
circled
You got
that too,
it?
but I thought it said pathetic. I'm sorry, I missed.
Wow.
It's all right. He just saw my Aggie cup. He's upset.
No, I thought that was my strength, and I misread it.
Develop self and others.
Okay, cool. All right, thank you. I'll call on Colin to help us if we can't find the behavior. He should know this like the back of his hand.
Well, one of my strengths is that I'm honest, and my weakness that I need to confess is that I misunderstood. Apparently, I was looking at like 6 or 8 different sheets, writing, Veronica, is this it? Is this it? And I thought I had it, and I'm not sure that I did. So I
Well,
apologize.
tell us what
but
you
I'm
came up
learning
with.
from listening.
And we'll make it work.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me learn from others as they
Okay,
speak.
great.
Right now. Thank
All
you.
right.
Yeah.
The truth is that she has all those strengths. So
That's right.
I know it.
It's reality. Here's the
Right.
Oh,
reality.
wonderful. I love you.
You're just dotted everywhere.
So,
I'll jump in. Okay. I have systems I feel like I think about systems. So systems thinking under strategic thinking. And then empower innovation under innovative.
Thank you.
so Bobby, Mr. Powers had technical difficulties, so you can identify his 2 strengths if you are so inclined to do that.
Okay. That's awesome.
Look, he's laughing at, he doesn't want to turn it over, so.
You got it. We got it. I got it for you, Greg. Don't worry.
So Lindsay, I'm gonna go
I'll
with,
go next.
okay,
I guess mine is results driven. the data, I want to see the data, I want, talk is cheap. And collaborates, leverage partnerships. So I think those are the two that
Great, thanks.
in my la land mind, I think I have, so I guess everybody else can tell me the truth.
I would agree with that.
I was gonna
Mr.
name them all, but I didn't want everybody to start jumping in and saying he's lying.
You ran out of a highlighter. I would agree with you, Mr. De Leon, don't worry. Lindsay, I'm gonna say for me, it's confidentiality and professionalism under effective communicator, and then empowers innovation under innovative.
Great.
So I guess Belinda and I are very similar.
I guess I'm not confidential, though. I like that. Bring that to the.
Oh, it's supposed to be a team of 8. Oh, come on, people, stay with us.
So I'll just throw out there, culture under collaborates, and under strategic thinking, or I'm sorry, under innovative, I would say leading change.
Great.
So Greg, you see where you can fill that in there at the bottom? He's very adaptable.
Well, I mean, this worked out about as well as I could have hoped, so way to go.
Well, are you there?
Yeah,
Under, hang on, I've got to, under Bill's relationships, trusting relationships, visible and accessible, and then under, let's see, effective communicator, listening, actively listening, gathers input from multiple perspectives.
great. So even though we didn't check the box on adaptable, I think the balance of this is still pretty remarkable. And likely speaks to why this is such a strong team. And hopefully the process of going through and reading those behaviors and reflecting on yourself gave you some insight, some clarity about what's in this Experienced Leadership HCISD document, and also gave you some insight into how this can serve as a tool for leaders throughout the system to self-reflect and to identify, strengths that they can leverage and areas that they want to work on, which is one of the first ways that this serves as a resource to folks. So thank you all for participating. Jerry, did you want to add anything? Do you want to take that adaptable spot?
You're muted, Jerry. If you're gonna take it, you gotta unmute yourself, Jerry. Jerry, you're muted. Oh, you're muted,
I
Jerry.
can't hear you.
We can't hear you. Can you unmute her, Shane?
No, she has to.
Okay.
She has to do it on her end.
Just send us a text message.
So you're muted, Jerry.
Thank you. Well, I was unmuting at a different, can you hear me now?
Yes,
I was
okay.
unmuting above, but not on the screen. I actually, in the text that I was studying during this time, had actually, believe it or not, Lindsay, I had actually circled the adaptive leadership part and how strongly I feel about the importance of that. And so I don't know whether that's what that would open up to.
Well, wait a minute. Why does she get a star? She's.
I just feel like she completed, the full circle. So
Well, if you
You're
could
not
see
a
my
team
sheet,
builder, Lindsay.
it's really true. If you could see my sheet, that's exactly.
Mr. De Leon counts stars, Lindsay, so let's get a move on, give him a star.
So the final thing that I would say before closing out this section, and I'll pause in case there's any questions, that have come to your mind for Dr. Cavazos, for me, is, the circle. A lot of you have commented on the circle. And one of the things about circles is like they're not fixed. There's a perpetual state of motion. And in the same way that we described at the beginning, that we're in a very specific context that's placing new demands on leaders, and this is a tool for articulating what's next. That's going to continue to be true. So at Holdsworth, we don't think about documents like this as static documents. We think of them as living documents. And I think they're living in a couple of ways. They're living because the leaders who aspire to live into these attributes are growing and changing. But they're also living because as the district continues to evolve and constantly be relentlessly dissatisfied with the status quo and to face new challenges, you may want to refresh and deepen some of the expectations around these competencies and behaviors. And so ideally, this is a resource that can continue to grow and change as the organization grows and changes and meets that new context. So it just kind of leave you with that kind of encouragement and view to the future.
Lindsay, may I ask one question, please? Could you explain, and perhaps I apologize if I have missed this, but how was this developed? Because it is, I think it is profound, and I appreciate the time that we've worked on learning what it really means. How was this developed?
Dr. Cavazos?
Yeah, I'll jump in there, and I think Veronica can jump in, but Jerry, we took the same framework we did for strategic plan, and we put together focus groups throughout the organization to begin to inform us of what does leadership look like in HCISD and what is the expectation of leaders in the school district in today's times and into the future. To Lindsay's part about this is ever evolving. I don't think you ever arrive. You're always working on these skill sets and so forth. But we started from, we brought it to Transforming Teaching and Learning, and there was some feedback there, but we went throughout the organization and put focus groups together to really define what are we looking for in leaders and what are the traits that we're looking for. Veronica, anything you want to add?
Yes, Colin just threw it together. No. Actually, it also started, this was months back, but I don't know if you remember that we had a district-wide survey that we sent out to all of our employees, and we asked them very specific questions. And so with all of that data, we came back to the table and we created these focus group questions, and we had a lot of interactions with principals, assistant principals, instructional coaches, and teachers. And so throughout the entire process, we asked great questions, and I have to hand it to Colin and Keisha. They did an outstanding job, because after every focus group, we would come back together, bring the information to our senior team and our principals, assistant principals, and coaches once again, and then certainly our teacher advisory committee, or our teacher focus group. So it really is the voice of our whole district, actually.
Great. So here's a quick check on where we are against our agenda as I see it. So against our 3 objectives, we've spent some time trying to think about how leadership definition serves as a foundation for growth and development. Hopefully you feel like you have a deeper understanding of both the competencies and the behaviors that are articulated in this document, and the way they can serve as a guide and a resource to staff. And so in not quite the second half, the final third of our time together, we're going to dig a little bit into mental models. Because if you remember when we were with you a year ago, we shared this big, complicated framework called the Holdsworth House. If you don't remember it, all you need to remember is this. The leadership definition is the foundation for all of the strategies that you use to develop people in the system. That eventually all of those systems work together to make sure that you have the leaders who you need at every level in the organization to meet the demands of the future. And so this document that we've just talked about is really just the starting point for a series of strategies that can be used to support staff to develop and grow to become the leaders that Harlingen needs. And what we've found, so this is the part where I have to really highlight that last objective. What I'm going to share are some things that we've observed. So we've now been working in districts across the state since 2017. So 7 of those districts are a couple of years, I wouldn't say ahead, but a couple of years further into this journey. And so we've observed, what are some of the places that they go next in this work of developing people? And how might that look different than how leadership development has worked in the past? And so I'm going to teach a concept called, this is another one of those vignettes, called mental models. And then we're going to explore some of the ways that this work of developing a great pipeline of leaders might bump up against and challenge some of the mental models that we've carried around. And that's important both for kind of broadening our vision for what could happen in the future, but also because we believe at Holdsworth that one of the key things that leaders need to do is to be able to like confront mental models that are not helping them anymore, and to revise those mental models to be able to innovate and to change. So that's where we're going to head next, and then we'll send you off a little bit of homework. So some of you maybe, has anybody seen the Ladder of Inference before? Dr. Cavazos has, because I've showed it to him, and he probably had seen it before that. But so this is a framework that describes the way that our brain kind of takes in information and draws conclusions about the world. And a lot of times we think that the way that our brain works starts at the bottom of this ladder and then works its way up, you know? And so, you know, we observe something, you know, in the world, but it's not purely scientific. We select some information out of what we're observing, add some meanings to it, make some assumptions, draw some conclusions, adopt some beliefs, and then we take actions on that. And all of this happens like really, really quickly, and can result in us operating on assumptions, on conclusions that we can't even name for ourselves. And it's one thing to kind of think about the ladder working this way. This is typically like how we think that our brain works. But the interesting thing about the ladder of inference is this is also a reinforcing kind of feedback loop. And so, you know, each of us has like a long lived experience of experiences, of data that we've used to build meanings, assumptions, and beliefs that we carry around in the world that we use to take action. But once we've adopted those beliefs, that starts filtering down and influencing, you know, the way that we take in information in the world around us, what we perceive to be possible or not possible. And basically we start projecting, you know, a lot of our experiences, beliefs, and assumptions onto the world around us. And this creates what's called mental models. So mental models is a basic shortcut, you know, for the way that we make judgments in a world of like a lot of complex information. This is like a really natural thing that our brains do, and it's really helpful to us given the volume of information that we're taking in. And so it's not bad to have mental models. We all have them, in fact. But the question is, what do our mental models allow us to see, and what do our mental models cause us to miss? And so this comes from a text that we use in the district leadership program a lot called the Fifth Discipline, which is about learning organizations. So a lot of what you've talked about continuous improvement, I think it's very aligned with the kind of organization Harlingen is and wants to be. And Peter Senge says, the problems with mental models lies not in whether they are right or wrong. By definition, all models are simplifications. The problems with mental models arise when they become implicit, when they exist just below the level of our awareness. Because we remain unaware of our mental models, the models remain unexamined. Because they are unexamined, the models remain unchanged. And as the world changes, which if we think back to where we started, the gap widens between our ideas about how the world works or should work and reality, leading to increasingly counterproductive actions. And so the challenge that I'm going to pose to this group is to reflect on the way that we might be carrying around mental models about how leaders are developed. And you don't have to make any decisions during our time together about whether those models are good or bad. But all you have to do is just notice, you know, what are those assumptions that we bring to this conversation, and how might those need to evolve or change, you know, as we meet new realities. And this is where this becomes a problem. So when we have mental models that sort of are blinders for us on what's possible, new insights fail to get put into practice because they conflict with deeply held internal images of how the world works, images that limit us to familiar ways of thinking and acting. If managers or leaders believe that their worldviews are facts rather than sets of assumptions, they will not be open to challenging these worldviews. And then finally, this is a quote from one of my favorite books, which says, the inability to reflect to see that a single way of understanding can limit us restricts both individuals and organizations. So my goal in like the next 10 or 15 minutes is to share some sort of provocative descriptions of the world that we live in, the way that schools and classrooms are typically set up, to create an opportunity for the board to notice where we might have mental models that are shaping the way we think about talent development and leadership development. Does that sound good? All right. So this is the risky portion of our time together. And everything I'm going to describe to you are observations about the way that the majority of schools and districts are set up across the United States. Like when we look at all 14,000. So this isn't specific to Harlingen, but it's just an observation of things that have been true in schools and districts for a very long time. So you'll notice, many of you probably recognize this box sort of symbolizes the traditional teacher salary schedule. You've probably seen these. The basic idea is, and you already had some discussion about this very concept earlier today, but that a teacher's pay has historically been based on how many years they've worked as a teacher and the level of education that they have. And so if you place a teacher in one of these boxes, that will tell you how much that teacher makes. And your starting salaries in that box in the corner, and then the highest possible teacher salary historically has been in this box on the bottom. And I would be curious, and since we have a board historian, does anybody know the history of how we, as a country, we have both a board historian and a former teacher, arrived at like this system of compensating teachers?
No, I'm sorry, I do not.
In 1922,
You're actually pretty close. I thought you were going to like bring it in. So this will be the like high level version of history. But if we think back, to the early 1900s, there was a period where the teaching profession was almost, especially at the elementary level, when we think about one-room schoolhouses, was almost exclusively comprised of unmarried women who had very strict contracts and lived at the principal's house in the attic and were not paid very well. And then through the 1920s, 1930s, as American high schools were developed, that was almost an entirely different track of the profession because it was more specialized, more subject-based, and it was mostly comprised of men who were teaching in the high school. And so when we moved to a more comprehensive public education system that went K through 12, a lot of people noticed that it wasn't very fair to have the elementary teachers work with such different pay and under such different conditions than the high school teachers. And so this was a huge innovation at the time because it provided comparable pay based on objective criteria that applied to like all teachers. But it's like remarkable that it's largely still intact, 100 years later. And it's still with us. And it's interesting because it still shapes so much of an educator's career and of how schools are set up. So these are just some observations, and they're designed to get us to say, like, what do we notice about the mental models that we might be carrying around? Which ones are still serving us well? Which ones might be outdated? So my question would be, and these can be rhetorical, how many students typically are in the classroom of a teacher who's in this kind of top left box? In most districts, go ahead.
Lots of them.
Lots of them. In most districts, the answer is whatever the average number of students are that we have in a class, right? So if the class size average is 22, the answer is 22. And then if we move down to the teacher who has the highest salary, the most experienced, best educated person, and I ask the question, how many students are in that teacher's classroom? In most cases, it's the same number, right? It's like the average number of students who are in a classroom. Now, Colin would point out that in some cases, those teachers are teaching specialized classes with the most advanced students and the smallest number of students. But for the most part, it's like you just assign a certain number of kids to every teacher, no matter where they fall on this. And then, another question I would wonder is like, so if these are our most experienced, most educated teachers, do they have any formal opportunities to lead, coach, or mentor other teachers? In most cases, in most districts, the answer is no. And I would just pose the question, why or why not? And probably the answer is because it's always been that way, to some degree. We're going to take this a little bit further, and then I'm going to pause for some discussion. And this whole structure is still like related to the way that we structure schools and classrooms. And it's implied a little bit in the discussion, because there's typically a single teacher who teaches a specific number of students, and that's what we think of as a class. Depending on what district you're in, it might be closer to the 18, it might be closer to 30, it might be larger than that number. And then we have a certain number of these things that we call classes that are all teaching students of about the same age, and that's what we call a grade. And then there's a certain number of grades that comprise a school. And these stars reflect, we name some of these people department heads or whatever. And then all those people have a principal, that's the big desk, and then a certain number of assistant principals or other administrators, and those are the small desks. And then we expect those 2 or 3 people to supervise, coach, and mentor all of those teachers in all of those grades. And for the most part, this is the way that schools have been structured for as long as the teacher salary schedule has been around. And there's a sociologist out of Stanford, and I was reading some of his work on the history of education the past couple of weeks, and he sort of summarizes it like this: teaching is a totally horizontal profession, lacking the vertical career path of lawyers in a law firm or professors in a university. Except for high schools, which have the position of department chair, there is no higher level teaching position to attract the aspiration of teachers. Newcomers to the profession take on the role of teachers in their first year on the job, that's that top left box, and hold the job and the same role until they retire. Promotion normally comes only by leaving teaching for administration. And this was written in the early 2000s, but this statement has been true since the middle of the 20th century. And so the question that I would, I'm not advocating for any specific changes to this model. I'm just observing that it's been the same, despite everything that's changed in public education in the last 100 years. This is virtually identical. And the purpose of this discussion is not to discuss which of these things should we change and how, but the purpose of this discussion is just to notice, where we see certain mental models or assumptions about education, assumptions about educators influencing, the way that schools are designed. And I'll just pause here for some brief discussion or reflections from this group about kind of what you noticed or what you think about that.
Lindsay, I'll jump in. I mean, that's real interesting. I've always looked at that as well, and we do fall into the same situation. I mean, even the desk was the same from 100 years ago. Now Harlingen is different. Our system is a lot different, but one of the things that I look at is, and I know there's difficulties in it, but it's always been the grade, your age is the grade you're in, opposed to the academic component is where maybe you should. And so, first graders, second graders, it'd be good to see kind of education turning where it's not based on your age, but based on your performance, based on your academics, so that they build and they grow and they succeed faster than just maybe being in a classroom with everybody else and then they have a GT class. So, things like that. Now it's hard because of the mental age of it, and there's a lot of variables to it. But things like that, it would be refreshing to see different ways of having a classroom look.
Yeah.
Did I get a star for that one?
That's right. I'm doing the stars offline, but I definitely just put one.
But you're ahead. You're ahead.
It's a bigger star than what I gave to Jerry earlier. Other reflections?
Well, I would just like to reflect that you know, I've been around a long time, Lindsay, and it's difficult to believe, but this is the first time that I have been engaged in this discussion. And isn't that astonishing? Isn't it astonishing that something that has been around for 100 years has never really been, to any great extent, openly challenged, openly questioned? This has mainly been the way it is. And I think there are a lot of reasons for that, one of which is money. You know, money is a part of all, there's never been a lot of funding allocated to teaching and to education, to the extent that if one tries to shift a mental model and tries to, you know, address the structure, you run out of money pretty fast when you're trying to do that. You know, even it's just too limited to do much with. And, you know, even the scheduling that Nolan referred to earlier, you know, I kind of rejoiced, my heart sort of leapt when he said that, because, you know, year-round schools obviously were tried years ago and very few districts stayed with it. But the schedule we're using was based right on the farming, on agriculture, and children needing to help out during times. So this is a classic example of something that's been done 100 years for no good reason why. And so if we could have a lengthy discussion of mental models, this would be a perfect topic for that. That's just my observation, actually.
Mr. President, may I chime in?
Yes, sir, Bobby.
I love mental models. I'll give you a couple of simple ones that I love to challenge all the time. You know, quick stories, and then I'll bring it and relate it back to this. But, you know, my mom used to leave, she'd cook dinner, and she'd leave food out to let it cool off before putting it in the refrigerator. Anybody do that? Right? And why do you do that? Why do you do that? Does anybody know the answer? Why your parents would do that? Or why?
I always thought it was because you were afraid the dish was going to break if you put it in the refrigerator too hot, but I don't even know if that's true.
So here's the mental model, right? My mom would say, well, there's going to be some type of bacteria growth, there's going to be something growing, and we got to let it cool down. So here's the reality. I've researched this. Back in the 20s and 30s, we didn't have refrigerators. We had ice boxes. Once a week, they'd come and deliver ice, a big cube of ice. They put it in an ice box, and if you put the hot material in there, well, it's going to melt that ice, and you'll have less refrigeration for the week. And so that's the reason why they would let it cool off, now put it in the ice box. I love mental models. The other one I love is, hey, you know, can't go outside and get wet in the rain. If you're a child, you'll get sick. It's not true, right? We get sick by viruses and bacteria. We know that. Most of us know that. But still, a lot of people think that. Mm-hmm. And so bringing it back to this, it's the same thing, right? We look at these mental models that we have that are, I mean, we're not here to discuss whether it's right or wrong, but I know that Dr. Cavazos and I 3 or 4 years back talked about, hey, why aren't we doing outcome-based pay, which is what we're talking about here, outcome-based pay for results. And one of the mental models that's linked to this artifact that probably is part of the problem that we sometimes see with our teachers, and I'm talking about in the United States, is the fact that they get into a system and they get stuck in that system saying, hey, I'm going to retire because the more hours I get in, the more time I do, I'll be set at that retirement when I retire. Not only that, but if I work and maybe advance the last 3 or 4 years, well, then my retirement is locked in at that price. And so guess what? We may or may not have good teachers, and they're stuck in the system because of this model, right? Where if it's outcome-based, they don't get what they want, they don't get the results, they're not doing it, so they get rejected or they get pushed out.
The thing that stands out, thanks for sharing your perspective. I think the thing that stands out to me in the connection to Jerry is most of these things have a good reasons why they exist. And the challenge is just then our context changes over time and we don't reevaluate the reasons that we need for the context that we're in now. And like your icebox example is a classic one.
Yeah.
There was a really good reason to do that, but like technology has changed, our world has changed, and our like behaviors, our practices haven't changed with it. So it's not at all a suggestion that like everything old should be discarded. Like if we go back to our opening, like there's a lot of things that have been with us for a long time that we want to conserve because they're serving us well. But it's just identifying like when do those assumptions limit us from seeing that there are other possibilities available to us.
Lindsay, it reminds me, can you put that ladder picture back up there?
Yeah.
Ladder, I think, I like that, but it kind of goes back to the discussion you were having earlier. I mean, it's almost just easier to conform, then it becomes sometimes too daunting of a challenge to just question the whole thing. So it's sort of like you just kind of conform and go with it. And, the Tatwadi, we always say the Tatwadi mindset, right? That's the way we've always done it kind of thing. It's just sort of like, it's just too easy to kind of like, well, this is the way it's done, and you don't even question it anymore. It's just second nature. And, I look at this, inference ladder, and I deal with this every day, just in my own profession, and in dealing and training and coaching up and learning from, younger doctors and other advanced care practitioners and that kind of stuff when we're in the care of patients. And what I, when you look at this sort of situation, I mean, what strikes me is that, you can start here and everything, you're all well-intentioned and you're great, you're going along, trying to get good outcomes, good results and things like that. But it sometimes starts as a garbage in, garbage out phenomenon, right? Like if you select if you observe the wrong things, or maybe you don't observe the whole thing, right? Just a piece of it, and then select the wrong data set, right? I mean, now you're adding meanings and assumptions and drawing conclusions from a little slither of the situation. I mean, and it's not even the whole context or the whole perspective and that kind of stuff. And so the most important thing for me in this is not only that continuously reflecting and going back and everything else, is just continuously questioning whether it's right or wrong, right? And to do this, I really feel that the people that are really good at always getting better at pattern recognition and what they're viewing and they're always questioning and they're reflecting and they're not afraid to say like, okay, I guess I was full of crap here. I was totally wrong here. They have that growth mindset, right? I mean, it's not a fixed mindset. They're always tackling the most difficult problems. And they do that because they want to learn and they don't mind being wrong or admitting that they totally screwed something up, right? But there's a lot of people, Lindsay, and you and I know, we all know them, that, boy, they're perfect at this ladder. But they're always getting it wrong, and they're legends in their own mind, but they never really go back to reflect that they were wrong all along. They just never knew it because, they just enjoy being right, and they enjoy thinking of themselves as. And so it's interesting to me, that's also part of the way you get to a Tatwadi mindset, right? Is that that everybody's full of too many people with a fixed mindset that are like too busy to do the hard work of tackling the challenging problem, right? It's just like, forget it. It's the whole system's like this, just forget it. Why bother, And so I feel that Harlingen CISD is sort of like just tired of the same old crap. Like, how do we do things different, And the problem though becomes, and we've talked about this, before, is in the context where we're so reliant on, systems of the state policy systems, state funding, and local community challenges and community rules and this, that, the other, and then expectations of parents and workforce and this and that, and it becomes something that one district just can't do by itself. However, there's certain things where you can sort of say, okay, well, we can do this thing or that thing that's a lot different, right? And so, and that's where you need folks like Dr. Cavazos and who are policy experts. And we don't, I mean, you know, we like to think we know our own policy pretty well, but we don't. I mean, he has to remind us, you know, and the thing about that is not only our own district policy, but the state policies. I mean, this is not our profession. And so then we have to always circle back and say, gosh, can we even do this? And you'll be like, no, that's illegal. Oh, gosh, okay. Why is it illegal? You know, why is it illegal? And so it's frustrating sometimes because, you know, we've had a lot of these discussions, you know, over time, and sometimes it's just like, gosh, well, we just can't do that, you know. But I've been shocked at some things that we have done that I'm like, okay, this is pretty cool. And so I don't know if that helps or not.
Yeah.
But it's an exercise of frustration when you need so many other things to fall into place to make the kind of innovative change to really shake up the system and do things differently. Whether it's about calendar, competency-based things that he's talking about. You know, really transforming and elevating the teaching profession in a way that's really needed you know, that's really needed. It's just, it's tough.
Lindsay, I would add a couple of things to Nolan's, you know, recap of this is that sometimes when the mental models are observed by the masses, and that there's a whole wave of this is the way it's always been, it's very hard to begin to chip away at the mental model. That's issue number one. And issue number two is that we live in an instant world, and there's very little appetite for delayed gratification to see it through. And so, you know, we've worked a lot in that space here in Harlingen, that we're going to see it through, and we're going to delay the gratification, but there's not an appetite for changing a system and sticking around long enough to see it change, right? And so because regression to the mean is so powerful, and I think the mental models, to Nolan's point, we can all be wrong, but we don't challenge it, right? And either because it's not within our scope of control, or it's just the other side of the mental model and what has always been the norm is so great that to begin to chip away at it is to create a culture that change can happen and what is possible. And I think that's something that we've been able to do here in Harlingen. However, it's taken a long time, right, to develop that trust and that commitment.
Well, and that makes me think, I mean, part of why these systems and structures have been so enduring is because the people who have sought to change them at times have not done the responsible rollout
Right.
behavior under innovation. And all of those failed attempts to change the system increase everyone's belief that the system is unchangeable and is sort of inevitable in its current design. And so,
And that the mental models are true, right?
That's right.
And they
That's right.
affirm the mental models because, look, they tried it and it wasn't successful, you know, that kind of
Right.
stuff. So.
Right. And so it's like this willingness to think differently about things and then be patient to do the work of evolving, you know, the system. The other thing I wanted to name, you know, and then I'm going to transition us into like zooming in on some specific kind of mental models that might shift around talent development. But I just want to name, I think there are so many mental models that are being challenged in 2020. You know, like we had a mental model that school was in person exclusively, and like that's the only way it could be, you know, and like on and on and on. And just to express some empathy for the fact that it's really exhausting to revisit and to revise your mental models, and that there are a lot of boards and district leaders, campus leaders, and teachers who are like confronting the need to change and revise some of these assumptions, and just like what taxing work that is on everyone, and so being mindful, you know, of how much of that like cognitively heavy work, you know, people can sustain at any given time. And I think for me, just how much respect and appreciation I have for teachers in their classroom, who somebody mentioned earlier, who are doing the innovative work of saying, yeah, no, we can do this a little bit differently. But that's really like taxing work for folks.
Lindsay, can I add to that real quick?
You bet.
Because, you know, talk about innovation and having these teachers saying, hey, I can do this. What's beautiful, and we're talking about this whole mental model, and there's a mental model that I'd be remiss if I didn't share this example of
Does anybody know who Roger Bannister is? Colin, yeah, good. Roger, Lindsay, you know who Roger Bannister is?
Unfortunately, I don't. Colin will, you're going to educate me, and then Colin will.
Yeah, so Roger
Second
Bannister.
class.
Are you gonna give him a star, Colin? He's not part of that team. Oh, okay.
Bobby and Colin have just gotten big stars.
My whole point was to try to get Colin to communicate with us, and it worked.
You did it.
So Roger Bannister, there was this belief back in the early 20s, before the 20s, that you could not run faster than a 4-minute mile. 4-minute mile could never be broken. Roger Bannister was the first person to ever run a 4-minute mile. And what's interesting about that is that once he broke that barrier and that belief system was changed, right after that, within a year, we had 10, 15, I don't remember the exact number, 10, 15 people that broke that. And that's what's cool about this, what we're talking about, is our teachers who have the innovation, who are willing to change and willing to share, we're going to be able to do the same thing that Roger Bannister did, that phenomenon of, hey, we can do this, you know? And I know that that's what's going to happen, not only here, but throughout the United States.
That's great. Colin knows that because he was cross-country coach. Colin, is there anything you want to add?
No, but I do love.
He's talking.
That's right. Yeah, I'll come in because of that. This is not to your point, Dr. Muniz. This is to the last point before that Dr. Cavazos was making. But I do think the part about mental models that is sort of like, how do you do a responsible rollout of a change, I think is so important, because if you take the example that Lindsay was using there about classrooms and the way they're set up and the way the teachers are distributed amongst the school, you know, there's been an entire infrastructure that was built around that's how teachers are trained, and that's how professional development and skill building happens. You learn about the child development of the kids who you are intending to teach. I learned about high school, not about elementary. And so when you start breaking or trying to move some of those things around, I think it's not to, push you away from making those big changes, but doing that responsible rollout of thinking, what are the other mental models that got built around that, and just continuing to think deeper and deeper about when we do make these changes, what are all the other repercussions that will happen that we'll have to be ready to deal with? Because just like teachers are dealing with intense, mental fatigue from changing every single thing that they did every single day, that happens over and over and over with every change. And so I do really appreciate that about Harlingen, that you all constantly say that phrase, responsible rollout, and just thinking about how we're going to do this so it works well and feels good for people.
If I can chime in there, Colin, thanks for doing that. It is true that a lot of people get to a point where they know that change is needed and they know they have to do this, but they don't take the next steps of, okay, what are the second and third order consequences once we do this? And they don't do that, and then so that goes to the point you're making about responsible rollout. It is so important to play it all out, to play it through, or else it's just not going to be as successful otherwise. So that's good.
Colin, you want to take the rest of this? Just kidding.
All of a sudden his screen froze. No.
Try Colin dropped. So here's what we're going to do in our last 15, 20 minutes. And I'm going to move fairly quickly. And it's going to feel a little bit like that first section, looking at the teacher salaries, at the design of the classrooms. I'm just going to kind of highlight, hey, here's the ways that we thought about things in the past. Here's some things that might look different in the future. And I'm going to go fairly quickly because, frankly, the goal isn't to make any decisions about any of these things. My goal would be that we leave here thinking, oh, I'm really curious to learn as we kind of continue to embed this experience leadership, Harlingen CISD, what new opportunities there might be for us to think differently about how we develop people. Knowing that any of those new ways of thinking about things will be rolled out really responsibly in a really disciplined way. So this is just designed to sort of provide some inspiration to what that might look like. And then I'll take some questions, share some homework, and then we'll close out. So Here, I'm going to provide like one anchoring concept, and then I'm going to share some things that we've observed in the districts we worked with so far. So one of the key frameworks that we use to guide our work around how do you develop people to be able to grow in all of the areas described by that leadership definition is this concept called the leadership pipeline. And here's the basic idea, is as you move through your career, there are different kinds of roles that you have. And as you shift from being primarily focused on leading yourself or being an individual contributor to being a leader of others or a leader of teams, the demands that your leadership faces shifts with that. And the book describes this in 3 areas. So basically, when you move from leading self to leading others, there's new skills that you need to have. You know, we've all experienced this anytime we've gotten a new job or a new role. There are some things that we have to learn that we didn't have to know how to do in our previous job. The second is our time application. And for any of you who have shifted to managing others or managing teams, you go from spending a lot of time working at your desk by yourself in front of your computer to spending a lot of time interacting with others, leading others, coaching others. That's a time shift. And then values. You know, when I go home at the end of the day, how do I think about whether I had a successful day? And is it something that I made or something that I did, or is it somebody who I coached and somebody else who I helped be successful? Is it a team, you know, that I helped to set up for success? And it's pretty nuanced, but if you think that your value is mostly based on what you do directly, when you shift into a new role that requires something else, leaders can really struggle with that. So I'm just going to warn you in advance, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit here. So this is like one of the key shifts that they describe from leading yourself to leading others. And this kind of describes what I just talked through. You're shifting from valuing getting the stuff done to working through other people. You're shifting your time from doing the work to supporting others in doing the work. And then you need all these new skills around planning, coaching, and supporting other people. And basically, there's a ton of research that's been done about why really smart, high-performing people, you know, struggle to successfully move in to a new position. And I would describe this as sort of having 2 parts. One is pre-selection factors. So we might be selecting for the wrong things. And here, I'll give a sports analogy, if anybody can follow me on this. You may be familiar, if you follow football, that there are a lot of young men who are really successful college football players, but who, it's assessed, do not have the skill to translate into being a really successful NFL player. This is particularly true with quarterbacks. And the reason is because it's like a different kind of game. And so the NFL has developed like all these protocols for thinking about how do we identify people who have the skills needed to succeed in this new job. And it's not as simple as just picking the people who have been successful in their old job. As college quarterback, there's a whole different set of skills and attributes that we look for. And I think a lot of times we assume that if somebody's really successful right now and we just pick them up and put them in a new job, they're going to do great. But in fact, the attributes that they need to succeed in the new job might be different. So we might be selecting for the wrong things. And the other option might be that we're not doing what we need to do to develop and prepare people to make that transition. And if we think back to that leadership definition, it's not that you have to have all of those attributes fully developed, but it's that we have to have a plan for how we're going to support you to develop this skill that's going to be key in your new job. And so it's shifting to think about how do our development systems, you know, support people to make that shift. And so if we think about this as like a framework, it implies like a couple of things that might be different, a couple of mental models that might get challenged as we think about how to really live in and bring that leadership experience document to life. And I'd say those in 3 areas: development, identification, and coaching. So in terms of development, I think if you look at these things on the left, this describes how leadership development works in most school districts across the state, across the country. There's a standard curriculum that everybody goes through. It's classroom-based. You might come in for a 60-minute session on a Tuesday night. There's a certain amount of time. You start in June, you finish in March. Anybody who's interested in leadership or in developing these skills can come to the course. And we touch a lot of things, but at a pretty high level versus kind of going deep in the area. An alternative to that is like, what if we thought of leadership development as being personalized? It's really based, if you think about all those aspects on the wheel, of what are the specific areas where this person is strong and this person needs to grow and develop relative to this new leadership challenge. What if it could be more job embedded, where instead of you coming into a classroom and like hearing from me, you could be doing work in a school with coaching and support from another leader. This variable time idea, what if when you started and when you finished wasn't based on a calendar that we set in advance for everybody, but was based on how long it took you to master the competencies that you needed to succeed in the next job? What if we could find the highest potential people, the people who are closest to being ready to move into the roles that we know we're going to need in the future, and really concentrate some development on them? And then what if we could be more targeted about like those key shifts, that people need to master? That's like the old mental model, new mental model that I'd want to pose. And if you're wondering like, well, what would that even look like? I'm bringing as a source of inspiration a leadership development program that HEB runs called the School of Retail Management. And the way that it basically works is really simple. They identify some folks who they think are just on the cusp of being great store leaders in advance. So they don't wait until they have an open store leader position to start looking around and asking who's ready to move into that position. They're looking proactively. Then they have identified the 6 or 7 or 8 experiences that people need to have mastered if you're ready to be a store leader. And so that might be experiences in different departments around the store with different aspects of the operations. And basically you're placed in a store for a rotation, and let's say you're focused on bakery and learning bakery. You're going to study under the very best bakery manager that exists in your region. They're going to teach you everything you need to know about how to oversee that division. And only when you've mastered all of the competencies of that rotation does your rotation end and you moved to the next one. And they continue kind of this experience. And there's some courses, but this basically means that some people graduate from Sorrel in 12 months. Some people, it's more like 36 months. It depends on what you knew coming in and how quickly you master the new experiences. And then that allows them, when they have a store opening, to have a whole pool of future store leaders who are proactively being developed, who they can move into that new position. And so it's not random, it's not accident, it's a very deliberate process. And, there are ways that a school district could think about starting to move in this direction, by thinking about, are there any ways that we could start giving people rotational experiences, in their jobs? And one interesting thing about HEB is they don't move just the department heads, they just add a position on the store where the rotation is going to occur so that that leader can rotate in and be mentored and coached and then move to another store. You can include more job shadowing in your development, more mentorship and coaching, and intentional partnerships. So a different way of thinking about how development might work that helps to bring kind of that leadership definition to life. And then the other thing that's implied in this is you can only develop people in that way if you're actually proactively identifying your future leaders in the system. And I think, the first question, which this is a trick question, is, are we identifying future leaders? And we could open this up for discussion and we could debate, are we doing that or are we not? But the simple answer is, of course you are. Everybody is doing this. The question is just, is the process systematic and intentional? Because right now, all across Harlingen, all across every district in Texas, principals are looking around and saying, who on my campus do I think, has great potential to be an AP or to be a principal, and they're coaching and developing those people. So the question isn't, are you doing it? It's, do you have a systematic process to maximize, the insight that you get? And are we using consistent criteria to identify the people who might be future leaders in the system? And I hope that you can imagine how that leadership definition starts to provide a foundation for how you can start asking, who fits. It's not just who I think would be a good future leader, who do you think would be a good future leader? You hold up, that definition, you say, who embodies these attributes, or who is growing to embody these attributes? And then you make sure that those criteria are widely shared and understood across the system. So that's that's like a concept that is true now, but will start to match up against some mental models. And then the final piece is like evaluation and coaching, which is if we're on the lookout for who those future leaders are, we're actively working to identify them. We want to make sure that they're being evaluated and they're being coached in ways that are providing really clear, transparent feedback about where they're at and how they can grow and how they can get better. And so, these are a couple of the systems that have long history and long tradition in a lot of districts, but there's a lot of opportunity as you pursue this work to ask, where might we want to think a little bit differently about this? Where might we want to try something new in our approach? So I'm gonna move us towards closing out here, unless Dr. Cavazos, do you want to add anything to those kind of reflections?
What I would add is that the spirit of the leadership definition, we should embrace it like the spirit of the strategic plan. And it gives us permission to do things differently, responsibly, but to identify those systems and practices and bureaucracies that have kept us from having a talent management system, an early identification talent system, and really preparing our future leaders to assume the roles that we know are going to exist in this district in very complex times. And so we think that the heavy lift was creating the leadership definition. The heavy lift is having the courage and the boldness to use it to challenge our mental models and challenge our current systems that have gotten us to where we are today, but I think there's a lot of opportunities to get us even further and make us even more stronger in the leadership pipeline realm.
Lindsay, can I add something or maybe ask something for you and Art and others? But, it seems to me that sometimes the best, as I'm reflecting on this presentation, I was eating my food while you were presenting, so I cut off my video, so you didn't have to see that. I eat fast. But I wonder if the leadership definition also identifies people who really want to be leaders for the right reason. You said something earlier tonight that, in fact, highlights where it's sometimes a draw for people to get there just because it's the highest paid jobs in the district. And there are a lot of people who become leaders just because, well, they just want to get paid more, let's be honest.
Yeah.
And so I hope that we have a definition that also identifies people who are really there for the right reasons. It's like wanting to be, how many doctors do you know that become doctors for all the wrong reasons, right? And and so we can go on and on and on. But I mean, I think the best school leaders they're there for the right reasons, and I hope that, I don't know if it is or not, it's a question, but I hope that it's baked in to somehow the leadership definition.
Yeah. My short answer would be yes, and I think part of how that happens is you make the expectations for leaders really clear. I mean, these are really demanding, hard jobs, and I think you make clear on the front end, these are the attributes that you have to demonstrate and live into. And I think that does allow people to self-identify and self-select.
And Lindsay, the other thing that I would add is that in those attributes, to Nolan's point, as you look into Harlingen as a place where you want to become a leader or you want to be part of the leadership development, is that it's not okay to opt out of one of those attributes. Right, in Harlingen, we expect all the attributes, right? And either in development format or in mastery format or is in continuous learning. But you can't say, because I've heard this in the past, well, I'm just not an effective communicator. Well, there, in this leadership definition, there's not an opt-out option, you know? And so, but oftentimes, people that don't get the job say, well, I do everything great, but I don't know what strategic thinking means. And so this takes away the vagueness of what we're looking for and creates a lot of clarity. And by default, people will opt out, saying this is, I mean, now I know what is expected, right? And so I think that it serves both purposes there as well.
Yeah. All right, so we're gonna, this is a discussion that we would love to keep having, and we're coming up on the end of the time that we had planned. And so we'll pause this conversation here, knowing that it will continue as Harlingen keeps advancing this work. And I believe we're gonna leave you with a bit of homework. Veronica, do you want to talk about that, or do you want me to do that?
I can talk a little bit about that. So in your email is an article that we wanted to share. Every time we go to a Holdsworth session, we come back super enriched and wishing that we could come back and share everything with everybody. So one of the articles that we did read, I believe it was in June, is the article that we sent you earlier today. It's a great read. We had a chance to really have great discussion around that read. And as we're moving forward through this pandemic and through this very unique year for our school district, it really gave us a different way to look at how we're gonna proceed. And so we've done a lot of wonderful things in Harlingen, really, really proud of the work. Every chance that I get to thank a teacher, I do that because, wow, they have just done amazing things in our classrooms. And at the end of the day, us as leaders, along with our campus principals and assistant principals, have to lead our way to this pathway of recovery. We need to continue doing all the great things that we've done in the district and continue to be the bold district that we are, and really breaking through some of those mental models to create wonderful opportunities for our kids. So hope you enjoy that article. I am going to hand it over to Dr. Cavazos because I think we need to say thank you.
Yes, so.
What's the
Go
title
ahead.
of the article?
It is, I believe it's leading during change. I mean,
Leading and learning
during-
in times of crisis?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So part of the Holdsworth and what we've learned is that feedback is a gift, even regardless of who you get it from, Nolan. I mean, everybody. But I do want to take a moment to express our gratitude to Lindsay. And I'm going to go back to something that we've said in the past, that when we were looking at our kinder readiness rates a few years back, the only way we were going to get better is if we were vulnerable and settled into what we knew we weren't doing as well as we could. And so, Lindsay, your approach to building this team of 8 around the value of leadership matters, and we've got to get this part of the organization right. Your approach is greatly appreciated. You let the board members show where they shine. I don't know that they all agreed that that's where they shine. You gave Javier a star. He's going to get it virtually. But you recognize that we are blessed to be around this great team, and our commitment to you and to Holdsworth is that you chose the right district. We needed you to change our mental models and to tell us and to show us what's possible. And so we're ready for the challenge, and we thank you. And thank you for just being a great person, Lindsay. We appreciate you.
Well, thanks for having us. It's always a pleasure to be with you, and look forward to being back together in person soon.
And Colin is a great person too. I gotta tell you, because he knows all the inner workings of the district. He could pull us, a board member aside and say, he's full of it.
Right.
Colin, stop it, Colin. So, I'll turn it back to the board president, or any board president if you want to ask the
Yeah,
board member.
does any board members have any closing thoughts, reflections?
Lindsay, may I, Mr. President, may I?
Go ahead, Dr. Ruiz.
Hey, excellent presentation, very thought-provoking, and I love hearing feedback from my colleagues. It's always inspiring to hear the thoughts that they have. And thank you for being the catalyst in this process. I have one question for you, Lindsay, if you will please allow me to ask. And, you know, in the whole process of learning about this, just one question. Can you recommend a particular talent development strategy for us?
Told you that was one of our objectives, so I declined.
Thank you.
We already thanked you, Lindsay, so don't ruin it, okay? So don't fall in that trap. So,
Anyone else?
Jerry's saying something.
Jerry, you're on mute.
You're still muted.
You're still on mute.
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I pressed it again 3 times. Thank you. I just wanted to say, Leslie, that I perhaps should not say this, but it's been either 24 or 25 times that I have been in these sessions. Without a doubt, this is by far the most provocative intellectually. This is by far the most stimulating in terms of getting of interest, stimulating interest, and by far the most beneficial. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. If anybody else doesn't have any comments,
Yeah, I just want to say great job, Lindsay and Colin. Really enjoyed it, and it's always good being with you guys. So thank you.
Greg looks like he has something to say.
Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry, Mr. President. Just
go
wanted to
ahead,
say
go ahead.
thank you so much. You know, I feel like we go in, you know, we feel like we're doing good work and we're thinking good thoughts, and then we run into this kind of training. And you're like, whoa, okay, we're good. Okay, let's reorder, let's rethink. And that we have room to grow and now a framework to put it in. And you really started with that, right? Like you know, I'm going to give you a frame, but you got to paint the picture, and you did. So thank you so much. I'm excited to be a part of it.
All right, I think that's it. Lindsay, thank you again. And just to bring it all back to something I said at the beginning was, you know, I don't think this district is afraid to be even more bold and more innovative as we move forward, but it starts with this leadership development, developing our leaders in the correct way. So I'll just end with that. Thank you again, Lindsay, on behalf of everybody. And I now adjourn this meeting.
We're still
Let's wait a
live,
little
guys. We're still live.